So I have a background, I actually have a background in electronics. So I have a PhD in electronic system design. And then I have worked myself up in the software stack, you know, all the way, step by step, like firmware, operating system, final application. And then I moved over to product management. And now I do product things. So I'm a talk show host, I'm a trainer, I'm a product thinker, and I love everything product related. And I really love this book that we're going to talk about today, Epic Alignment, and how that can help product managers. But I'm not alone here today to discuss this amazing book. With me today, or shall we do the agenda first maybe? Yeah,
it's up to you.
Yeah, we can do the agenda. So let's look at the agenda. This is what the day or the evening is going to look like. We're going to do an introduction here in the beginning of the panelist and the author himself. And then we're going to have a panel discussions where we're going to go through different topics that are touched upon in the book and see what we think about them or what the panelists think about them. Then we're going to open up the chat so you can post your questions in the chat. You can start posting questions in the chat already now, but we're not going to talk about them until at the end here. And then there's going to be a mingle in a tool that I never used before. So I'm really scared about this because Nils just told me it's a mixture between video conferencing and gaming. And I really suck at gaming, actually. When I worked as a product owner for a Linux platform, all the guys were like, we're going to deliver on time, Petra, if you promise to play video games with us. And then I had to play like Super Mario and stuff with them. And I always lost everything. So I'm a bit, okay, but it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. We're all going to be there and see what that tool can bring to us. Yes, so who's here with us today? We have LeMay, famous author himself, and also great product guy. And we have Aman Singh, who is a document lover and a product manager. So Aman, let's start with you. So being a document lover, do you think that a book is taking it a little bit too far? Like, why do you need so many pages?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think Nils should have written the entire thing inside of a Deliver doc. So, you know, he could have dog fooded the product and allowed everyone to get access to it. But that's true. You know, it's nice to have a physical version and it's beautiful. So everyone should read it.
I think that's so great. He should have, it's like a circle theory. He should have written it in his old tool. And then, yeah, that would have been beautiful. That would be the next book, the sequel. That's going to be nested inside of an epic template. Great. And Matt, you're an author yourself. So I'm just kind of assuming that you've been to a million book launches and you know all about book signing and all of those things that you have to teach Nils now. Or...
Nils is teaching me. When I finished both of the books I've written, I think I posted about each of them once. I said, I have finished a book. Here is a link to purchase the book. I hope you enjoy the book. Thank you and goodbye. So I am inspired and grateful that this is such a lovely community-oriented opportunity for all of us to speak with each other together. I think it's great.
Thank you. I really love, did you really write thank you and goodbye?
I may very well have.
Okay. So maybe don't do that, Nils, because now this is your big night to shine. The author of Epic Alignment, Nils, woohoo, who's also a project evangelist. Not only an author, and keynote speaker, thought leader, and you know who. You have so many things on your resume. You make the rest of us look so bleak, you know. But anyway, I have to ask you, the cover of this book. Actually, when I printed, it looks much nicer, the blue color, because I really love the blue color. But
yeah, you have better printers than Amazon.
Yeah, we do. So tell us, how long time did it take to do this, to design the cover?
Yeah, I have to be a little bit humble here. I didn't actually do it, but we actually worked with a fantastic illustration artist that did the cover. So it was a little bit of a project, you know, figuring out what should it be like and having a brief where my designer helped me write the brief, and it was actually a real project. It took like 2 weeks back and forth to come to the conclusion. So like you probably figured out, it's more work than it looks maybe to make a book cover.
I think it's so funny and it's beautiful and it is really epic. It feels epic. It feels like an epic book cover. So you did good, or your designer did really good.
Thank you.
Great. So then we're going to move from the cover of the book into the content of the book. But the first question, that we're going to ask Nils is, why did you write this book?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's a question. I think I don't know how many authors can really answer it. So for me, it started out with just doing so many interviews with product managers to figure out how they work with how they work and how they tackle writing documents, as we were doing a tool for that area. And then we just interviewed so many. And after a while, I started maybe writing some blog articles and saying, there's so much thought in here. I have to compile it together somehow. And I started out writing a few blog articles, and then I said, no, this is so much. It should actually be a book. But then I took completely water over my head, and it took like a year. But then with some help from Matt among others. I mean, it was really a big work. But and I guess part of it was that we felt like during all these interviews, there are some pointers here that's common among the product managers that managed to get the right way around it. And so the idea was then to get those ideas out, and so that's kind of the starting point and the reason for writing the book, I guess.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and it really feels that you have filled the gap here, that there was a need for this featured document among product managers, and we needed that to fill something. And I'm wondering kind of, because that when we started this agile revolution a long time ago, and some of us have been there since the very start, there was a lot of talk about we don't need documentation anymore. And actually, because of this manifesto that was written like 2001, this was by no means when it was invented, but this is something that had a big impact on all of us, I think, all of us working in software development. And they have a line here saying working software over comprehensive documentation. And this was kind of interpreted by a lot of people like we don't need documentation anymore. And now we can really feel this surge. Or how is it where you sit, Aman? Do you feel this?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I started out my career at EY, it was a fantastic way to get involved in big enterprises, but they weren't really looking at doing anything in an agile way. So it was huge amounts of waterfall documentation, which meant that most things were out of date by the time the customer actually got it. And then on the flip side, you have startups where you are supposed to be really talking to the customer very, very often to develop your working software. But there is a happy medium by which we need to get to actually allow cross communication within your organization for people to understand what you're building and why, and to document those decisions along the way.
Mm-hmm. Matt, your thought?
I think that's right on. There's always a balance to be struck. I feel like people ignore almost the most important part of the Agile Manifesto, which is at the bottom of it, where they say, which is to say, while we recognize the value of the things on the right, we value the things on the left more. So in keeping with the entire history of human efforts being misinterpreted, the folks who wrote this were they were like, please don't misinterpret this as all documentation is bad. And people were like, great, got it. All documentation is bad. No documentation ever. So I think right there, I've generally found it helpful in my own mind to reframe it as the things on the right in service of the things on the left. So documentation insofar as it helps us deliver working software, process and tools insofar as it helps facilitate and structure individuals and interactions. So I think thinking about these things in system rather than in opposition has been helpful for me in avoiding some of those exhausting dogmatic debates about Agile.
I really, really like your take on the Agile Manifesto insofar. I think I'm going to start using that as well, because this is really, yes, you have to read all the way to the bottom, Okay, but seriously, Nils, have you ever had your ass saved by a feature document?
Have I ever had my ass saved by a feature document?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what can happen is, but I also want to pick up on this this thing with working software versus comprehensive documentation. I think I completely agree with what you guys said, but I think another. First, I was like, wow, you really covered the area. But if there's one more thing to kind of twist out of this lemon, one more drop, I think it's the word comprehensive, because I think that is something that is to be avoided. I mean, the goal shouldn't be that you write about everything that could absolutely happen that has ever been said in there. So I think you should quite take a big step out away from comprehensive, and then you can kind of figure out to capture the most important things. And then I think then you can really be saved by it, because if you make sure you capture the most important things and somebody steps out of the room and they're not there, they can come in and they notice, oh, wait a minute, are you about to do it like this? That won't work because of XYZ. I think that's one of the most clear in the situations where you're saved by the document, when somebody that was not in the meeting can come in and they scan through it and they react to something that you wrote down because you wrote it down and because you were concise enough so that they could actually bother by looking through the relevant parts.
Okay. Yeah, but I really like your analogy there, that you can actually be saved by this document if someone steps out of the room, misses this discussion, or if someone is not part of the discussions maybe, but someone that maybe you have a dependency on the legal department or somewhere else, and you can share your thoughts easily with them, that this is how we have reasoned, this is how we discuss, this is the motivation, etc. So I think that's really good. But picking up then on this comprehensive documentation and that it has to be just good enough, Matt, this ties very nice into your 1 hour, 1 page pledge that you have. Can
yes,
you share?
indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been through my own phases in this documentation journey, and I was very adamantly against documentation for a long time, except for when I was writing the documentation and I wanted people to tell me how great it was, which is not a great thing. So I think at a certain point, I have come to really respect and admire just absolute unflinching constraints. The idea behind the 1 page, 1 hour pledge is when you're documenting anything, don't spend more than 1 page and 1 hour on it before you share it with your team. Because when you are trying to present something that, per Nils's point, is comprehensive or impressive, or like, look at how this has perfectly captured anything, you're not working collaboratively anymore. You're working in a mode where you're presenting and receiving as opposed to truly collaborating. So the idea is that if we can just commit to absolute unthinking constraints, which force us to share with our teams before we feel that we have achieved that bar, whether we consider that comprehensiveness or impressive or perfect, or we want to give that presentation and get that positive feedback, if we can force ourselves into collaboration before it feels certain and before it feels comfortable, then we're more likely to create a shared sense of accountability, a shared sense of purpose, and to actually create something together which everybody feels invested in, and which will hopefully help accelerate our journey from a plan to something that is working software that is actually creating value for real customers and real markets.
I really like what you're saying there about that we're creating a share. So we're doing this together, and it's a really great tool for this collaboration and sharing things. And there is lots of research in this area done on, and Nils and I had lots of discussion about this, about boundary objects, which are objects that you collaborate around. And you're really writing a lot about this in the book, about the collaboration aspects of these documents, which is a great strength. And Aman, you have actually worked a lot with this template. So what are your, is it working? How can you keep it at the right level? And do you feel that it is good for collaboration and sharing?
Yeah, absolutely. So we first started using, or I say we, it was at Heycar, I started using Deliver probably kind of mid of last year. And shortly after the first lockdowns came in, new team members were being onboarded completely remotely. And it was difficult to get a space where you could work collaboratively inside of either a refinement or a grooming session, where you would have your entire team in one room and be able to concisely understand, okay, well, here's the context of the problem that we're trying to solve, because we got that from the strategy team, and here's what the designers think about it, and here's what legal thinks about it. Having that on one page and then going through in a working session and fleshing out all of those points together was a lot quicker and resulted in better work output than doing it kind of the old-fashioned way, for sure.
Great, good insights, and really good with some hands-on experience in the room. So what about this? So it's called epic alignment. So epic, it's kind of like, it sounds like it has to be so grand, like an epic. Can it be just this OpenShift migration? Who wants to answer this one? No one. Okay, so then it's your turn.
I'll chime in. I mean, I'll chime in with a definitionally unsatisfying answer here, which is to say that it depends. I think, you know, when you're, it's very, I've become very wary of making absolute prescriptive declarations about anything related to product development, because I think that on some teams, like, depending on the texture of the communication, depending on how often people are talking to each other, you can have like 1 or 2 words shorthand and everybody's like, I know exactly what that means. I know exactly what we're doing about it. That's great. On other teams, you do need to spell things out more because you don't have that communication. You don't have that same sense of shared knowledge. You know, as Aman said earlier, like if you're on a distributed team where people aren't, there isn't that same kind of ambient knowledge. You have to be deliberate about things in different ways. So I think, as always, pay attention to what's happening in the real world. Don't fall in love with your process. Be very attuned to the outcomes. And if the way you're writing your epics isn't working, if people are confused, if you find yourself having to do a lot of rework or a lot of second and third order explanation on top of the documentation you've already done, then discuss it with your team. Say, what's not working? Let's try something else. And eventually continuously improve your way into something that works better for you.
I like that kind of iterative approach to find the right level of your epics. Nils, what's your thinking about the epics? You know, why are they called?
Yeah, you know this. We discussed this before, Petra. So I love the word epic for 2 reasons. One is because it's just epic. You know, you have to love something that just has like inbuilt into the word some kind of awesomeness. It's just a very nice word. But then a little bit more serious. I think the cool thing with the epic is that the user story is such a well-defined thing. You write it like that, and you work from it. It's a very small increment. And the epic, I think, is when you sometimes the user story is just implementable by itself. It's just, this is a small improvement and everybody's happy with it. And if that's the case, I think that's great. Then you should go with that. You don't have to create epics for every development piece. But as soon as you start to sense that this is something a little bit bigger, what is this? Then I think it's really important to kind of figure out a good level for your team to have like, what is now a bigger chunk that we're going to work with? And I actually liked your Swedish translation that you had for this. It's well, in Swedish, now you're going to hear a really long, weird word, samarbetsobjekt. But in English, it's like collaboration object. And that I think is like the best definition of what an epic is, because it's like you as a team decide that this is some kind of entity that we're going to collaborate around as a project and make it as an improvement. But then I think there are 2 adjacent kind of conditions that are important. One is that you still have the kind of user story mindset, that it's valuable for the customer, somebody, who does it benefit, how does it benefit them, and so forth. And the other one is that it shouldn't be eternal. It should be something that you do, and you have this thing that you collaborate around, and then you're like, okay, great, this was the epic, it's done now. Maybe it's several versions of it, that's fine. But at some point it's done, you just archive it and move on. And maybe you want to refer to it, that's fine, but it shouldn't be like a live thing that you go back and update. It's like you have it for the collaboration for this thing that you do, and then you move on. That's kind of, yeah.
So your lifecycle managing.
Thoughts on epic?
Yep. You put it in the bin once it's delivered.
Yeah, kind of.
I know. Okay, that hurt a little bit. Okay, so you will put it, frame it, and put it on the wall once you have delivered it. Aman, do you life cycle your feature documents, or you keep them forever, or they have a certain lifespan and then they serve the purpose and you move on?
Yeah, again, to Matt's point, it really does depend. If it's a feature that you kind of think, I've released my first MVP, I'm gonna go and do a second release, depending on whether it works or whether it doesn't. Maybe we're gonna test this first. If the test fails, yeah, archive it, move on. But if it's something that you think you're going to iterate on, then you can, link the documents together, or I found Deliver is useful for just keeping that sense of context. If you've got the same document open, all right, you knew which decisions you took last time and what worked and what didn't work, and therefore you can use that in your second release or your third release as well.
So you're kind of using it as a knowledge database then, or learning. Yeah. Are you also using it for support?
So once the epic would be completed, usually it depends on if it's customer facing and the customer doesn't need to have any explanation of how to use it, then I think the document's fine. If it's internal, then what we do is create a separate piece of documentation for internal users that doesn't necessarily contain all the decision making and all of the kind of other aspects of the epic that's needed to be in the original kind of feature document, but would just be personalized to implementation. How do I use this? Why does it matter to me?
Good, excellent thoughts there. So one thing that I find is hard, I don't know what your life looks like, but I always seem to have like 100 epics in my backlog. So any tips on how to prioritize these epics? Shall we start with you, Matt?
Sure. It's funny you mentioned that, because this brings me back to one of my favorite experiences coaching and training product managers. I was working with a bank in the United States that was very hierarchical, command and control oriented, and they were doing a scaled agile transformation. But what that meant was that they had a backlog with like 10 years of work planned out, and they were just pulling it off 2 weeks at a time. There was no learning, there was no change. And one product owner on one team, something snapped, and he went up to his team. They had a physical backlog with documentation, and he went up to it and ripped it down and tore up all the epics in their backlog. And people were going, "What are you doing?" And he said, "If we're not hearing about it from our customers, I don't want to ever hear about it again from you." And my mind was completely blown, because I think it was an extreme example of an important thing, which is that one of the reasons people don't like documentation is that if you document 5 years of development work and you never actually learn from customers, you never revisit it, you never actually do prioritization based on things that change in space and time, then what are you doing? Then you are going through the motions of a quote unquote agile process while still gaining none of the actual agility that is ostensibly the point of all this. So I think prioritization is its own conversation on how you prioritize against business goals and user needs, et cetera. But I think that the bigger risk I've seen is that teams that have too built out a backlog have stopped doing prioritization entirely, and again say, well, we've got 5 years of stuff that our executives want, and no one's going to get mad at us if we build any of it. So what do you want to do next? And it is not great.
That's not great. That was a bit, I like that, maybe I should also do that at some point, just tear down the whole backlog, and like, if I don't hear it from the customer, it's not in here, If we go back to the book then, Nils, you are writing about output, outcome, and impact, and how to use that. So care to share some thoughts?
Yeah, exactly. No, I completely agree with what Matt said, and I think it's valuable to have all these insights and these customer comments that you get and all this. It's good that you collect it, but what sometimes happens is that people, they become prisoners in their own prioritization matrix. And so they have this ginormous table in a way, and they have like maybe hundreds or several hundreds of things. And then they do this. I think all prioritization metrics are good if they are used the right way, but they end up with doing some kind of, maybe it's ice or rice or whatever they choose, and then they can become prisoners to that. And I think that's kind of doing it bottom up. And I think the best way of doing prioritization is to do it top down. So you start every now and then, you start by just chucking everything out, and then you start from scratch and you go, okay, piece of paper. What's the goal we're trying to achieve here? They gotta go, who are we trying to help here? Who is the kind of relevant person or persona or whatever we're trying to target? And then you go, okay, what problems are they having? And that's when you get to the kind of customer. The first thing, what are we trying to achieve? That's the business impact. And then you go down to what are they trying to achieve? What's their problems? Then you go customer outcomes. And then you draw that kind of like a tree. And then after that you go, okay, so that's what they're trying to achieve. What could we do for them then? And then you come to some kind of a solution. And then you do a tree and you go like, what feels like the top most important things for us right now, based on intuition and top down and just having discussions with this tree with people. And then when you have that, then you can go, okay, but wait a minute, how many people actually asked for this? Oh, it's this many. How many people actually? And then the rise and all those things come in, and they can be fantastic, and it's good to build it up with data and observations. But I think just top down and bottom up, they both have a role to play, but you should always start top down and based on intuition, and then complement it with the bottom up and data. And that's just my 5 cents.
I think it's really great. So we had 2 panelists now saying just tear everything down, start from scratch, take the white paper. So what do you say, Aman? You're gonna be the swing vote here.
Yeah, I think the ultimately the thing that matters is, have you changed an outcome? You know, have you made an impact to your customers? Not what you've actually done, like what metric has changed afterwards that you've tangibly impacted. Well, one of the interesting things that I thought about that was just in terms of prioritization. Often the things that really get on high in terms of the prioritization scores are customer facing. They really are impacting customers. But then there's also this category of work, like at Twilio, they call it keeping the lights on. It's we need to refactor our code base. We need to make sure that our data pipelines are working correctly. And that stuff never gets high on the prioritization list. And one of the issues you can often have is, unless you take a kind of a portfolio approach, the great fancy customer objectives definitely get done, and it's really impactful for the business. But what gets slightly overlooked is, actually, are you building that amazing house on some shaky foundations? Because you're moving in the right direction, but we just need to make sure that this doesn't turn into the Leaning Tower of Pisa or some other kind of building that doesn't really work in the long term.
That's so good that you brought that up, Aman. What are we going to do with the keeping the lights on? Are we going to write epics on them? Or what do you say, Matt?
I think that's a great point, Aman. Yeah, because there's always the risk that, and I hate saying this, I wish this weren't the case. I'm like, there's always the risk of being too focused on the immediate feedback you're getting from your customers. Because we should all be customer focused. And I think honestly, like 90% of companies never get to the point of having that problem, but 10% do get to the point of having that problem. And yeah, I think being clear, what I found helpful in keeping with this theme of systematizing things is a lot of that keeping the lights on work does have a customer facing impact. You just have to dig into it a little bit more. Obviously, if your product has a massive outage, if there's a risk of that, that is bad for your customers. If you are creating an experience where one thing I've found helpful when kind of looking at some of this re-architecting work is how much time will that save us on other things we need to build. So if we look across and keeping with that portfolio thinking idea, if we have 10 exciting user-facing features we want to build and one kind of refactoring thing, if that one refactoring thing is going to save us 50% of our development time on those other 10 things, then yeah, we should look at that and we should take that seriously and think about writing that up as an epic or however you want to write it up, as a story we can tell to get excited about. But I think that there's a risk if you don't systematize it, if you stay stuck in that like fun, exciting customer facing thing versus boring, sad infrastructure work. I think there is work to be done from a narrative storytelling standpoint to systematize those things and say, this isn't boring infrastructure work. This is going to be the jet fuel that supercharges our ability to solve customer problems faster. So again, I think that the qualitative dimension of how you frame this, how you systematize it, how you make this a compelling story, even if it's not a compelling user story, is very important.
Yeah, and thank you for telling that to me, Matt. I wish I met you many years ago when I was in a Linux platform, you know, fighting for survival every day. But then we really were the jet fuel, you know. All the fancy applications should remember that with all the customer features. We were the ones powering them. Nils, I saw that you were like jumping. What do you want to add?
Yeah, no, I was actually really excited about your answer, Matt. Because I had a lot of discussions with people like this, and I never encountered your answer, but I think it's great. I mean, I think it's like if you can kind of get the story of why it's important to do these tech things that underlie and ensure stability and performance and improve future development velocity and all these things that are great. I think that's fantastic. And I wish I would have tried that approach of saying you have to tell the story. I think it probably would have worked in a lot of cases. What I found another like a little bit more, I don't know, defensive or lower ambition approach that I've seen work quite well at least is something that once was referred to as a donut model. I think it's a really cool name. It's basically it's from Joel Sandri originally, but you take a pie chart and you just make a hole in it and then it's a donut. So it's actually just a pie chart. And the idea is that the donut model, you look at the donut and you just say this slice will be for technological maintenance or decided by tech or what they think is important for kind of velocity, performance, stability. And then you have some portion for bugs or improvements, and you have some portion for features or epics. And then if you just get some agreement with the organization that you have to reserve a certain portion of what you do to that kind of work continuously over time, then typically that resolves some of the worst situations, because within that box, people that will then prioritize those most important things. But it's kind of more of a defensive. I wish I would have had this kind of, it has to be like this story. So I was excited about it. I liked it.
And you can also kind of put the flip side on this. If you can't put the story there, if we talk about these big migrations or tech shifts that you have to do, and if you can't tell the story, do you really need to do it?
Exactly.
What are we enabling with this tech shift? You know, there has to be something, right?
Yes.
Aman, you want to add something to this? A bit heated discussion here.
No, absolutely. I think the storytelling is the hard part, because often it's easy to get excited about customer related things, and often the really big architecture shifts, you know, day to day, week to week, you don't see much progress. You know, it's all in the background, and it's really difficult to keep fighting that or drumming that beat of saying, you know, this is the vision, this is the vision, this is the vision. When you're on kind of a big re-architecture or a quite a long you know, migration to a different type of service, etc. But yeah, that's the job that everyone has to keep working on, especially with your senior stakeholders.
Okay, now we're gonna leave the fun part. Since I'm a platform lover, you know, and I love these tech shifts also, actually. That's kind of my favorite thing to do, big tech shifts. And talk about something that I actually am really bad at. And you have a whole chapter on that, Nils. And that's this user story thing, you know, and you wrote here, you know, it's a shared language, it sounds so great, but you actually also wrote that a lot of product managers see it as writing haiku poems. And I think I'm one of those, right? I really have a hard time with this user story. And Aman, I know that you had some thinking about these user stories, like who has to write them? Do the product manager have to write them?
Yeah, I think most product managers would love to be the kings and queens of user story writing. And personally, I've seen it both ways. As someone who was formerly quite protective of the what and the why, but like I said, it depends on the type of project that you're working on. If it's a very tech focused project, then it's natural for you to take a bit of a backseat, but be the devil's advocate in a team and allow your tech leads to, kind of really come to the fore and develop the stories there.
So Matt, seriously, what's so great about user stories?
Nothing is great about user stories.
Yeah.
Here's what okay. So here's what I think. When I'm doing agile coaching with teams, there's a rule I have, one of very few rules I have, which is anytime you adopt an agile practice, we need some success metrics. We need to look at signals that this agile practice is actually doing what it's intended to do. The reason we do user stories is to keep us in our users' mindset, to keep one foot planted in our users' reality. So my rule for teams is often, if user story writing is successful, then I would expect to see an increase in the amount of time the team spends learning from users. Because if you're writing user stories just as haiku, where you're saying, I wrote the magic words, I said, as a blank, I want to blank so that I can blank, but you're making it up and you're not actually learning this from your users, then that's worse than if you did nothing, because you are pretending to be user-centric and you have this bizarre ceremonial incantation you all write together that lets you say, look, we're being user-centric. We wrote, as a user, I want to use this new feature so that I can get the benefits of the awesome feature. That's not real. Unless you are actually learning that from your users, user stories do more harm than good. So I think, first of all, to echo what Aman said, yes, absolutely. Like when product managers are like, I'm going to get great at writing user stories and do it all by myself and tell the team what to do. No, that's bad. But even when the whole team is writing them together collaboratively, if you are conjuring out of thin air an imaginary user who has an imaginary problem that just happens to be solved perfectly by whatever your executives want you to build, then no, stop it. Burn it with fire, kill it. I hate it. Don't go through the motions and pretend you are being user-centric because you put a certain set of words in a certain order. No.
No, that was Matt's answers. Nils, what's your response then?
Wow. I love the kind of contrarian approach. I think it's super good. No. But I mean, I'm a big fan of user stories, but I must also kind of agree with Matt, because I've seen so many kind of extreme ritualistic user story writing, and I my kind of favorite, or what do you call it, the opposite of a favorite, my anti-favorite example or favorite example of a horrible user story is anything starting with as a system I want to, so that. And then they kind of completely abandon any idea of being user-centric, but they're still following the kind of formula. So I agree with anything on that. But I think they can be really helpful, because if you articulate them in a way that I'm not so keen on the exact formula. I like the word story. I think you should think about it as telling a story about what the user will do. And actually, one thing that you had as a tip, Matt, for my book that I think was super good for the user stories is to try to add like a concrete quote from a user within the user story. So when you write the user story, and then you add a little bit of details. If you have like a quote from a customer or a user that said like, I would like to be able to do this because then I would to do this, then it's fantastic to add it, because then you really add the flavor and help on the actual user stories and not just the formula. Yeah, and I'm not so keen on the exact formula either. I think it's a little bit of haiku-ish. I think you can write them quite flexibly, as long as you kind of capture the idea of telling the story of what some user wants.
Excellent. And they are, I mean, one of the things with user stories actually is that they are supposed to be a base for discussions. So they're not closed like a requirement specification. They are open, right? Great. I think we should look a bit at the chat and see, because I think the user stories at least generated something. They always do, right? As a user, I want to put my feelings into the chat. so that I can see Matt explode. Okay, am I supposed to read this? Questions for Matt. Any tips and tricks for product owners who join a team with a massive backlog? Just throw it out. Matt, go ahead. It's your question.
No, thank you for asking that. And I certainly don't want to be the person who's out there like proposing completely unfeasible things. I mean, my suggestion would be time box and learn. So when new POs start, what I will often advise them to do, if you're trying to prioritize a massive backlog, give your team an hour to prioritize it together. Do work quickly enough that some amount of prioritization happens naturally, which is to say, I've seen a lot of teams fall into the trap of grooming or maintaining a massive backlog, and the amount of time and energy that goes into that backlog is pulling them away from actually delivering value to their customers. So I've found time boxing to be a very accessible tool for folks who might be kind of trying to get their bearings at a new company, figuring out what they can do. Say, great, let's just spend 1 hour, like, hey team, let's look at the backlog, just spend an hour. We can use a quick prioritization metrics. We can do dot voting. We can do whatever we want. But the point is, use the time box to kind of force our focus a little bit and say, great, in this hour, we're going to identify the things that we want to look at now. Then we can retrospect on how do we do that? How do we make this happen? So I think, yes, deleting it and starting over, very hard to advocate for, especially when you're starting out, but using those constraints, using those time boxes as a way to avoid the trap of falling too far into hypotheticals and into plans that don't reflect the reality of our business and our customer is a good way to at least start building that prioritization, not only into the way the team prioritizes items in the backlog, but also the way the team prioritizes its own time and attention.
I actually did this today. Today we did this prioritization exercise where we had lots of things that we had to agree. And I'm like, let's do the top 5, you know. We also had limited time, and then just let's pick the top 5. Let's fight for the top 5, and then just forget about the rest. Maybe we can go until top 10 eventually, but for now we don't need more than 5, you know. Just to kind of force. We talked about that before in the beginning, that you know, if you put constraints like time box or just pick 5 and something, you are able to progress a lot faster than if you're looking at the whole world at once, you know. You want to add something, Nils or Aman? No, then we move to the next. Yeah, sorry. No. Then we move to, I think this question from Fredrika is how has product management changed from before COVID to after, if we talk about working remotely versus on site? Aman, you go first.
Yeah, absolutely. So my experience just pre-COVID was working at a startup where I was sat next to my engineering team. So if they were working on a story, if we wanted to you know, jump on a whiteboard, we could do that immediately. And obviously everyone's gone through the same experience. Now you have to schedule your Zoom calls, you have to schedule time with an engineer or a designer, and you lose the, you know, the flexibility of all of those things. So yeah, it's definitely been a huge challenge for us. One of the things that I really thought was really beneficial for our team was increasing or doing little exercises to increase the trust within the team. So you have that aspect of psychological safety. The people can, if they join a new team, ask the stupid questions. They can, and you know, if you mess up, you know that the team's going to be protected. So, and that really made a whole lot of difference in terms of our own productivity and the way that we could go about ideating and delivering new features.
Excellent. So there has been some pros actually also, some things that you are doing better now than before. Or?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the structure is now better. If everyone is remote, it's a lot easier. If you have this hybrid model, often I think that the people remote are second-class citizens. You know, if you've got a lot of people whiteboarding in one room and a camera pointed at them, it's really difficult to make it work. And I don't know how any company is going to successfully adopt that unless they have really, really good tech. But sometimes it's actually nice if there's one person remote, everyone jumps on their laptop and they join a mirror board or you know, things like that, just to make that equitable across your team.
I think it was really good insight there, Aman. And I actually noticed this because I work a lot in, you know, big multinational companies that have these satellite sites, you can say, and they're always struggling a little bit because they are behind the headquarter or they don't hear what's, you know, happening at the coffee machines in the hallway or on the whiteboard, etc. And then when COVID hit, they were actually one step ahead. Because they were already used to working like through chats and meetings and chasing people in different ways. I thought that was really interesting. I don't know, Nils, did you see something similar?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I completely agree with the. I guess two things. One, I completely agree with the weirdness of hybrid meetings and everybody moving to a distance. Like we're several times having meetings with people in the office, like you and me, Petra. We're in the same building right now, but we're in different rooms because of this exact reason. Like that's how you have to do it when it's remote. So everybody becomes remote. But then I think another thing that I think it's almost makes the book more relevant, because in the book there's one part where I talk about the 2 pizza team, and the idea is that you should be able to, everybody can sit in the same room, and a small startup, you're everybody together, you can share pizzas, you talk to each other, maybe you write a post-it note and put it on a wall, and you know what that means, and you don't need to write a document. And you don't need documents until you get more people or people are dispersed. But now everybody is dispersed. So now we've seen like even a lot of small startups need to be much more rigorous and write documents in a way that they wouldn't really do before, because it's so, even if you sit in the same meeting and you talk about something, if you're not then in the same building for 42 hours or 48 hours or whatever, and then you talk about it again, you haven't synced, then you still almost approach the need for documentation of a big company. So I think that's another thing that has happened, is that in a way everybody has been in this balance between documentation and software. Everybody's been pushed a little bit to do more documentation now, I think.
More structured. Yeah, Matt, yes. Your thought?
Yeah, I think that I agree with everything that has been said so far. I think, Aman, I particularly appreciate you bringing up the fact that, because as we move back into hybrid, I do worry that we're going to go back into the remote workers as second-class citizens issue. Like, I was so bad about this early in my product career. We would do day-long planning sessions where we were all in a room. There was one developer in Colorado who was on Skype and who just kept saying, I can't be on Skype all day. This is killing me. And I think, whatever, it's one person, like, figure it out. And now that I've had to be in all-day Skype meetings, I just want to apologize to that person forever and ever and ever, because it's true. You can't do that. So I think, to echo what both Nils and Aman have said, everyone has to skill up their facilitation now. Everything has to be more deliberate. I think that's been the big theme that I've seen. You know, the last in-person workshop I did before COVID, I showed up with nothing, and I was like, let's co-create this from scratch. What are we trying to accomplish? Boom, what are our blockers? Boom, let's workshop this. You can't do that anymore, because if you try to do that remotely, the whole thing falls apart. People don't get value out of it. One thing I've been doing, I wrote an article about this the other day, is I've been trying to break down long meetings into what I'm calling synchronous sandwiches, which is like send through an asynchronous pre-read, then you have a synchronous meeting, which is very tightly choreographed to achieve an outcome, and then you send an asynchronous follow-up afterwards. So rather than doing a day-long road mapping session, we'll do one synchronous sandwich to identify our milestones we need to hit. What are the business critical milestones? We need to raise around by this point, or we need to increase our user base by this much by this point. We just do that really tightly scoped, no more than an hour on a Zoom call. Do the pre-read, do the post-read, boom. Then we have those as the inputs to the next session. Okay, what are the different ways we have to achieve those milestones? What are the different kind of areas we could look at? We do an hour-long synchronous sandwich around that. So I'm finding that my facilitation skills have leveled up enormously during this time, but I've also had to recognize that every 1 hour of synchronous facilitated meetings requires about 3 hours of prep. So a lot of the folks I've been coaching have been saying, look, one thing you're going to have to be prepared for, if you want that 1 hour long meeting to be really good, you have to treat it as 3 hours of your time, because you have to plan in advance. You have to send a pre-read so people have a chance to orient themselves to the task at hand. You have to send that follow-up because people will be a little distracted. So I think the weird kind of balancing act I've been trying to navigate is, it's good, but it asks a lot more of us, a lot more in terms of being deliberate, being thoughtful, structuring time and space. I think facilitation skills are egregiously undervalued in the product management world. And I think a lot of teams have felt what happens when those skills are egregiously undervalued, and hopefully have done the work of skilling themselves up around that.
Yeah. So I also have this experience, Matt, that a lot of the time I work a lot also with high executives, and actually the only time they have allocated is the meeting time. So then I have kind of a hybrid of your solution that you do synchronous, asynchronous, is that we do synchronous, and then I do follow up with them one by one to make sure that they do their job until we have the next meeting where we all sit together. And it could even be on the, on the phone while they are in the car or whatever. And I also read this article, if we talk, now we're going a little bit outside of product management, but that managers are going to have to change the way that they manage, people. They have to be a lot more seeking them up, be a lot more active.
I'm also going to note that I think this has been a wonderful time for bad managers to recognize their own bad management style. Yeah. Because people who have operated primarily through yelling or being really aggressive, when you're just a little box on a screen along with 10 other little boxes on a screen, it is a great equalizer. It is really funny to see people who've always kind of operated by just dominating the room try to do that in a tiny little box on a screen. And it's like, oh, this is not working for you. You're going to have to figure out how to actually make a case and explain yourself and speak to the why of what you're doing. Like, this time is a great teacher for people who have never had to level up their leadership skills, and I am here for it.
I'm thinking immediately that you can have a class for how you dominate the virtual meeting. But you were not thinking that much. Okay, Nils, we have a question for you here. Okay. What have you learned since you wrote the book? What's going to be in the next version?
Yeah, that's a good question. Now it was actually a couple of months now since the book was completed, and you always, whenever you release a book, it's a horrible thing to let go of, and immediately you get bombarded with the stuff like, I should have, and so. But I think that if there's one thing that I really kind of dug into after the book, it's the context where these epic documents live. I mentioned the impact outcome mapping in the book, and I mentioned roadmaps, and I mentioned OKRs. But I mentioned user interviews and discovery and all these things. But I think now that I really dig into this and try to, if I would do like a second version of the book now, I would really also zoom out one level and really focus on the other really important artifacts and how they interplay with each other. I think that's so important and something that people miss a lot on as well.
That you do mention it a little bit, at least for the roadmap, for example, you have it.
Exactly, but yes.
Good. Okay, Aman, was there anything in particular that you missed in the book and would like to see in a version 2?
That's
I give Matt some time to think about it. He's going to think about the evil manager. Can we get that into the book?
I guess it covers a wide variety of bases, like from really aligning your stakeholders, really focusing on outcomes, and then using documents as a focus of that. I don't think of anything offhand that could definitely be added to it right now. But yeah, so I'll hand on to Matt if he's got some ideas.
I will now evade that question by saying, no, I agree. I agree. I think, documentation is something which doesn't get enough attention. I think that documentation is often considered just something that happens easily or automatically. Like you have an idea and you write it down, and then it's written down, and then everyone knows what it means. So I think I appreciate and I'm grateful that there is a book out there that is helping people approach documentation as something that requires time and attention, as something which is a craft that requires people to really be thoughtful about it. And I think that as Nils said, I agree with you 100%. Both of the books I've written like a week after, I'm like, no. But that's also part of the fun of this, is that, you know, as you put things out there, everything is constantly in motion. And and the things you discover as things you wish you had done are also new discoveries and evolutions in your own thought that are prompted by the ideas you put out into the world and how other people react to them. So I think, and I'm talking to myself now as well, the more you can treat this less as like, oh, I wish I had done this, and more like, cool, I never would have been able to understand this or think about this other thing unless I had put something out there and it had helped lead me to this other thing that I couldn't see before. It's a great way to let your own practice and your own point of view evolve as your work circulates in the world at large.
I mean, I love that, Matt. I absolutely love that, because it is a process and you're learning. But having that said, and I know, you know, I have a list for you, Nils, of things that I missed. But I'm gonna take that in the after talk or in the mingle. Yeah, exactly.